Welcome to Your Nurse Advocates, Conversations with Your Nurse Advocate Consultants. Today, we have Katie Niznik with us. Katie has her bachelor's degree in sociology, and then she went on and got her master's degree in counseling and psychology. So we are welcoming Katie here today. What April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and I know we've had a lot of awareness months and done a lot of videos this month, but this we thought was really super important, so we do want to share that with you. So right now, Katie is currently, since 2010, worked at a women's non-for-profit shelter, and she has been there for the last 12 years and currently has had many roles as a legal advocate, sexual assault service coordinator, volunteer service coordinator, and currently her position there is sexual assault services director. So just want to welcome Katie.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And I want to put that out there too. And we're going to touch base on this as we go on in our conversation. But our services are not just for women. Even though statistically speaking, women are at a higher rate of experiencing these types of violent actions. That doesn't mean that men or anybody of any gender would experience this or might utilize our services. So I just want to, hammer that first point home, is that there is an agency like me that serves every county in Wisconsin. And so those services are open to any person with lived experiences with domestic or sexual violence.
Thanks, Katie. So I'm going to go ahead and just take a moment here to share my screen, and we've got a little slide presentation to help guide us through our conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and get that started for me here. Mm-hmm. And let me just put this in presentation mode, and then we will be good to go. Okay, so Katie, tell us a little bit about Turning Point.
Sure. So Turning Point is the organization that I work for. Like I said, there is an agency like us that serves every county in Wisconsin. We are a nonprofit organization. So we serve people with lived experiences with domestic or sexual violence, more specifically intimate partner violence. So if you'll go back to the previous slide. Sure. So Turning Point started off in 1979. It was volunteer run, or 1978, excuse me, as a domestic violence research project. We had our first shelter opened in 1980, and then our current shelter was built in 1989. And then we began receiving separate sexual assault victim services, which is my program that I run in 1995. So we are the sexual assault service providers for Pierce and St. Croix counties. So sorry, if you will go back to the beginning, I can start with some of like our mission statement. Yes, right here. Thank you. So there is a few things that we believe to be true, and I'm going to talk more about these throughout the presentation. But the first is that people are not to be blamed for the violence committed against them. That's something that we often come in contact with in our society. I think that part of the reason is if we feel like we can control the things that are perpetrated against us, then we can protect ourselves. So that's part of our own control. And we'll talk about some of the myths and victim blaming here later. But we believe that no one deserves to be abused, used, or beaten, regardless of their actions, that everyone should feel safe in their home, that no one should fear the one that they love. That's not love shouldn't hurt. And that people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect regardless of their identities. So next slide, please. Thank you. Turning Point's mission statement is to provide support and resources to achieve freedom from domestic and sexual violence. So really at the core of what I do is I'm an advocate. So I am there as a tool for survivors to utilize to achieve the things that they want and to gain knowledge about their options and their rights. So some of the services that we provide here is we are a 24-hour crisis line. We have a text hotline. We also have 24-hour crisis support. So for example, if somebody needed to go to the hospital, they were sexually assaulted, they needed to get a rape kit or something like that collected, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, a coordinator like me would be dispatched to the hospital to provide support during that time. We know that these things don't just happen during business hours, so it's very important that we're able to provide the round the clock care that people would need. So our emergency shelter, so it's really a transition, a temporary space for people to come to kind of gain their bearings and until they figure out what they want their next moves and things to go. So it's a safe place that people can be. All of their basic needs are met while they're there. We provide food, hygiene products. We have, beds, bedding, things available to them. We offer support groups. So this is an ongoing thing that people utilize just to, be around other people that have similar experiences to them can be very validating. Language services. So as advocates, access is very important. And so we try to break down the barriers that people would have to get the things that they need. And language services is one of those barriers. So we currently have 2 bilingual advocates on staff, Spanish speaking, and then we have contracts with translation and interpreter services. Personal advocacy is really a catch-all. Sometimes people just need a little bit of help, looking for apartments or, making a resume or even just printing and scanning and faxing. Yes, people can go to the library too, that's available. But it doesn't hurt to have another site because a lot of us don't have these things in our own home. Safety planning. So that's not just physical safety planning, it's also emotional and mental safety planning, just asking people how they are, what do they need. People know how to keep themselves safe, but when you're in a crisis, when you have a lot of things going on around you, sometimes you're gonna forget. You're not gonna have that real linear thinking. You're gonna be a little bit all over the place, which is the benefit of us as being outside support people, is that we can help pull together some of these things and make some suggestions that people can take. Wellness programming. So trauma is very pervasive. If you have a lived experience with domestic or sexual violence, chances are you've experienced trauma. It all depends on how people respond. But trauma affects many different parts of us, not just emotionally and mentally, but it also can resonate with us physically as well. So an example of wellness program that we've been doing is at the beginning of the month, we partnered with a couple professionals in the field that talked about some ways to release trauma, with breathing, there's yoga, there's many other tactics that people can utilize. And so that's just part of what we do is to create that opportunity for people to participate. Emotional support is pretty self-explanatory. We're not licensed therapists, even though I do have my graduate degree in counseling psychology. We're not licensed at my facility, but through my education and my experiences, I can tell you that while counselors are very versed in processing through emotional things and the impact, they're not always getting the in-depth knowledge about the dynamics that go along with domestic and sexual violence. And so that's where advocates can come in as a supplement, because we have a deeper understanding about that very specific piece of it. So that can be helpful. Some people do find that validating. Information referrals. So we keep information on the resources that are available in our areas and help people to access them. Legal advocacy, which people find very beneficial because the legal system, it can be very intimidating. So finding out information about restraining orders, about what's going to be happening once they make a report to law enforcement, if that's their choice. how to file family court paperwork, all of those things. We have people that are available to assist with that process. We cannot give legal advice, but again, we're versed in the systems and can offer assistance with that. Transportation, as many areas in Wisconsin are very rural, and there's not an established transportation system. There's not a bus line or anything that usually goes along. So we do have taxi vouchers, and then we contract with a taxi company, and then we also can provide, the staff can provide transportation as needed, depending on our resources. The next is our home start and clothing vouchers. So we actually have Second Chances is our thrift store. So all of the proceeds from our Second Chances store go to keep Turning Point running. And our clients can have access to this thrift store through our Home Start program, where they get things when they move into their new house to kind of get established. So there's furniture, there's some, some kitchen startup stuff, things like that, and then clothing vouchers and things like that so that they can get that. Medical advocacy, I talked a little bit about with our response. So that's going with people during SANE exams and follow-up visits, things like along those lines, making sure that they can get prophylactics and things like that. Prevention and education is much like what I'm doing here now. There are a lot of misconceptions and a lot of things in our society, and sexual assault and intimate partner violence are not really things that people want to talk about. Sometimes it can be, difficult conversation. So that's what we're kind of here to bring the information in an age appropriate way. And then last but not least, we do have a food shelf and hygiene products that are available for all the people that we serve. So what is our philosophy? It's empowerment. So what we're really going for is to give power or authority back to that person over their own body, over their own life. People that have experienced domestic and sexual violence have had their own power and control taken away from them. And so that's an important part of the advocacy, of the healing process, of all of that, is to start to gain back control over their own life. It's very important. We're person-centered and victim-based. Everybody is different. Everybody has different experiences. We can start with a baseline of some things that we know to be true, but we need to meet people where they're at, and their opinions are the most important. They are the experts in their own lives. So when we talk about our shelter living and other things, we have overlying policies, but we don't have a lot of rules. Again, this just goes along with people are in charge of their own things. I don't know about you, but I don't like people telling me how to run my home or run my life or, any of those things. So we don't do that. We allow or encourage people to decide their own needs and how they want to live. So now, more specifically with my program, so I serve adult survivors of sexual assault. So oftentimes if people are victims of child abuse, child sexual assault, there is, there could have been some disclosure at the time. Maybe there were some things and maybe somebody didn't take it seriously, or maybe they were afraid to say something because of threats and things made against their family or other loved ones or to them. So there's often a delayed disclosure with that. So people will come to us, to kind of test the waters out a bit for their first disclosure, and to just kind of talk about the next moves that's available to them before they move forward. So working with adult survivors, working with people that want to focus on the intimate part of their domestic violence relationship, chances are if somebody is not respectful or does not have healthy boundaries and other aspects of their relationship, they're also not going to be appropriate and respectful in the intimate part of relationships. And so that is part of the thing that I talk with people about. It's also hard to identify that. I think there's still an idea that when we're married that we have an obligation to our spouses and that sex is part of that obligation. But it's not. Our bodies are our own, and we get to decide when we engage in things and what those things are that we engage in. So it's still kind of, breaking down that assumption or that myth. And it was just very recently, actually, that Wisconsin state law changed that you can actually sexually assault your partner. So I can see why we're still kind of struggling with this, because it's been difficult to acknowledge. Stranger or acquaintance rape. So more often than not, people are going to be assaulted by somebody that they know. So the stranger jumping out of the bushes or coming out of the stairway at a parking garage, does that happen? Yes, that happens. But more often than not, it's going to be an acquaintance and a friend, a coworker, somebody that's going to be able to take advantage of somebody in a vulnerable situation, because rapists, sexual assault perpetrators, they are opportunists. Victims of human trafficking. I smile not because it's funny, but because it seems so surreal whenever I talk about it. I always feel, like this is something that's in a movie. But human trafficking is happening in Wisconsin, is happening all over the state of Wisconsin, and it's happening in our backyards. And it can be hard to identify because people that are stuck in that situation, they don't necessarily identify as being victims either. A lot of times it can be their partner or a family member that's trafficking them. But it is something that's happening, and these are people that we serve. And then stalking also tends to fall underneath my program, because it can often result in some sort of a sexual assault, even though it might not have escalated to that point yet. And then, so a day on the job, it really varies, and I do like that part a bit. There is a little element of excitement and not knowing exactly how my day is going to go. I mean, of course, I have things that I have to accomplish, and there's general duties that I have to complete, but if I am in the middle of a project and somebody needs me to go to the hospital, or something like that is happening, then I need to make adjustments and do that. So it's from working in other systems. I work in a minimum security early release program. It's, a prison in our area. It's doing presentations like this. It's working with kindergartners about feelings. It's working on campus, helping a student navigate the Title IX system. So there are a lot of different elements to my job, and I really do enjoy that aspect and getting to work with so many people. So this is just an example of some of the things that we do. So yes, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. We should be building awareness around sexual assault every month. But of course, this is a highlight, right? So these are just a couple examples of the things that we're doing. One that I want to point out that's coming up is Denim Day. It's always the fourth Wednesday of the month in April. So it is all you simply have to do are wear jeans in support and solidarity with sexual assault victims. So this is an international movement. It actually started in Italy. So a judge overturned a conviction of a driver's ed instructor who had sexually assaulted his student. And the judge said because the student's jeans were so tight that she had to have helped the driving instructor take her jeans off in order for the rape to occur, which then implied consent. So we know that that is not true. And so did the Italian women in parliament or in the judicial system. They wore jeans in solidarity with the young lady the next day. And that's kind of how Denim Day was born.
Thank you, Kate. And I just want to say, it's hard. I spent, as a registered nurse, I spent a few years as a sexual assault nurse when I worked in the emergency room. And, it is devastating what they go through. And if anybody's had to go through a collection and go through a rape kit and do evidence, it is pretty humiliating to have someone, collect your underwear, swabs and things. And you've just had this horrible thing happen to you. And now you have to, expose yourself and everything and share your story. And so it's very important. And I appreciate, Katie, what you do and everyone out there to support these women, because it's, or men, because it's certainly not, it's a very, very difficult situation.
Yeah. And the SANE nurses, SANE nurses do a great job of trying to, be victim-centered and trying to be comforting and respectful during that process. But it's just the process of collecting evidence. It's just, there's not a better
Very
way to do
cold.
it, unfortunately. Yeah.
It's very cold. Yes.
Yes. So thank you for sharing that too. Okay, so now the next part. So I've kind of given you a little bit about my organization, a little bit about me. So now let's talk about some common myths that I'm sure that we've all heard out and about. So the first one that I have here is sexual assault is an act of lust and passion that can't be controlled. We like to think about that people are, they're out of control. They just can't help it. They just see a woman in a short skirt and they can't help but to just rape them. That's false. Refuse to believe that. We all know ourselves, and I'm sure that if you were to ask your husband, another man that's close in your life, and ask them if they had control over themselves, they're going to say yes. Because sexual assault is about power and control. It's not about lust and passion. It's about taking advantage of somebody and exerting themselves onto another person. So that's why there's certain situations where consent can't be given. Like with children. So in the state of Wisconsin, the age of consent for sex is 18. And that is part of the reason is because of brain development, right? So you can't consent to things that you don't fully understand the repercussions and what they mean. So that goes along with age, that goes along with mental capacity. So people that have different abilities, maybe they struggle with some cognitive things. If they can't understand what that means, then they can't give consent to it. It's the same thing with, I know this gets really dicey and kind of complicated, is when alcohol is involved. And so if somebody is passed out or clearly under the influence, they can't understand what it means to give consent. They're not totally there with you. So even if they might be amazing, smart, coherent people, under the influence at that moment, they're not going to have that understanding, which is why it's considered sexual assault. The next myth is if a victim of sexual assault does not fight back, they must have thought the assault was not that bad or they wanted it. Well, they never said no. That's something really common that I hear in my line of work. They never said no, but did they say yes? The burden of consent lies on the person that wants to do the things. It doesn't lie on that person to say no, it lies on you to get a yes. And so our bodies are amazing things. I know that we can speak to this, being professionals in the medical system, like you can testify to how amazing our bodies are in healing and protecting ourselves. And in sexual assault, that's no different. There are a couple of different ways. We've probably heard of fight or flight. There's also freeze and fawn, are two other ways that we respond. It's you literally can't do anything because you're freezing, because that's what your body thought was going to be safest for you in the moment. We see this not only in humans, but I mean, you can see examples of this, in nature as well. And then the fawning is the befriending. If we can befriend the perpetrator or befriend or build a relationship with the dangerous person, hopefully they'll be less dangerous and more accommodating and nicer to us. So that's kind of a little bit of that behind those trauma responses. So a lot of victims lie about being raped or give false reports. I know this is something that's probably controversial, and it's been coming up a lot in the news and things like that with athletes, with movie stars, with politicians, a lot of things. And so what we can speak to that is, they're statistically speaking, sexual assault, false reports are 2 to 8%. That is the same for any crime, that's perpetrated. False reports in robbery, anything else that you can think of. It's the false reports are the same. And if you have talked to somebody about their experiences, or we just talked about collecting a rape kit, if you can understand the things that sexual assault survivors have to go through, you can see why people wouldn't make it up. Not only do you have to go through these other processes and these other things that you don't have control of, but you also then can be alienated from your friends and family, become a social pariah because of these things, because oftentimes it's safer to side with the perpetrator because of how they're presenting, or because they're a position of power. We want to believe them over the victim. But as I've said, it's in very little cases that somebody will actually lie about that. The next one, a person cannot be sexually assaulted by their partner or spouse. So we just talked about that, right, when we talked about sexual assault laws. Sexual assault is most often perpetrated by strangers. So again, sexual assault perpetrators or rapists, they are opportunists. So it's people that are going to be able to see you in a vulnerable position and take advantage of that. We have been taught, lots of body safety things like throughout our lives, especially as women, as a woman. I can say that there's many things that I've been told to do: carry pepper spray, put keys between my fingers as I'm walking to my car, all of these things. But it's often with somebody that I know that I didn't expect it to come from. And that's more often when it's happening. Wearing revealing clothing, behaving provocatively, or drinking a lot means the victim was asking for it. I mean, sexual assault is a horrible thing. Nobody is asking for anything. We should be able to wear what we want, do what we want. If we're not hurting anybody else, it's no reason for somebody else to assert themselves on you. And people, ideally, people would just be good people. If they saw you passed out half naked in the middle of the road, their first instinct shouldn't be to sexually assault you. It should be to help you get off the road and get you medical attention. Like, that's something that should be done. Men are not victims of sexual violence, so this is not true. While the rate is a bit lower than women, they are still also victims, and that's part of it, right? Is because of our idea of masculinity and of gender roles. We just assume that men want sex all of the time and that they're not allowed to say no and that they should have sex with whoever wants to have sex with them. Which is not, that's not true. They get the same determination over their own bodies, and they are not crazed sex people, like we've established already. Rape does not happen that often. Why are we talking about it? It's something, it's that stuff only really happens in movies, or I hear about it on the news, but I don't know anybody. Chances are somebody that's had this experience. Sexual assault or rape occurs in the United States every 107 seconds. So I did the math. And so if this is a 30-minute presentation, approximately 17 people will have been raped during the time that I've been talking with you all.
Oh.
So what can we do? What can we do about sexual assault? So some of the things that we can do is we can know the signs. So when I say grooming in the internet here, I'm really talking to parents because children are vulnerable people, right? So there's some things that we can look for, some things that we can put in place for safety for our kiddos. So the first thing is grooming, like I said a couple of times here, perpetrators are opportunists. So if you are the parent that's always at the baseball practice, that's always at the Boy Scout or Girl Scout meetings, that's involved and present, people are going to be less likely to want to try to take advantage of your child. Now I'm not trying to shame parents or anything about that. It's just that is a deterrent for people to try to take advantage of children, because that's something that they look for, is the availability of the child to them. And a perfect example of this is the internet. The internet is an ocean. It's an ocean of information, of access. It's an ocean. And so we wouldn't just put your kiddo in an ocean without a life jacket, would you? You would probably give them the tools. So checking up on your kiddo's stuff, having access to their passwords, making sure that they're participating in apps and things at age appropriate levels. That's part of their protection, not because they're going to do something, but because there are other people out there that will try to take advantage of them. And so again, being present and being aware of what's going on is going to be helpful. Even though you might get some pushback from your kids, they're probably going to be, a little bit upset about that, but it's to keep them safe. Another thing is knowing the signs. So trauma. So if all of a sudden somebody that is acting differently, they're isolating, so you haven't heard from them, they're not dressing normally, they're not participating normally in things. We know our loved ones pretty well and the people around us pretty well. So if you're noticing some differences in behaviors and some things like that, we should be asking, what happened to them versus what's wrong with you or what's wrong with them, because something could have happened. Another thing that we can do is get your community educated and organized. So that's part of what, Turning Point and agencies like me try to do, but we can't do this alone. We need to do this in partnership with our communities. And so like just one example of this is teaching consent starts young. So teaching children that they have ownership over their own bodies. So I know we've had talks about this in my family too, because we are an affectionate family. So when we were saying, don't make your grandkids hug the grandparents, that, that's something that can bring up some hurt feelings. But it's not about that they don't love them or that they don't want to show them. It makes sure that the kid knows that it's that it's okay for them to make a decision about their body and what they want and don't want. And so that translates into much younger or into much bigger things as they get older. Um,
And Kate,
so
I just want to share kind of an
yeah,
example here too. And I know we haven't mentioned it, but I'm very proud of Katie. Katie is my daughter. So she is my youngest daughter. And so one of the things we had an example, along these lines with would be Katie's niece or my granddaughter. And they were getting ready for a wedding, my daughter and some other, women, they went to get pedicures done. And our granddaughter and niece was very excited about getting her pedicure done. And then when she went in, she had made that decision. She says, no, I don't want a pedicure. And, my daughter couldn't figure out why she didn't want one because she was so excited. So they're checking out and getting ready to leave. And she asked her one last time, before we go, do you want a pedicure? And so it came out that she was going to have a man do her pedicure, and she was uncomfortable with a man touching her feet. So so what my daughter did is she asked if there would be a woman that could, quickly just give her a pedicure, and they were able to meet, they were able to comply and be able to meet her needs and go ahead and give her that little pedicure. But I just think of that often in this conversation, that is, one of those kind of examples where, the child, needs to have that ability to say yes or no. So.
yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Mom. I know I've been avoiding calling you Mom this whole time. I was like, I don't know how we're gonna go through this. Um, so another example of this is something that's really common, is that if kiddos are on the playground and a little boy pushes a little girl down, oh, he just has a crush on you, he's just playing with you. And so we started that young to determine what love or what affection looks like. And that pushing down on the playground, if that starts to mold our idea of what relationships are supposed to look like, we can see how that would be problematic, because as we get older, if that happens, it's not okay. So it shouldn't be okay at that young of an age either. So that's just something, just some examples and some things to think about. So the volunteer, the donate, like I said, there are organizations and places like mine in your county that you live in. So speak up if you're seeing some of these things happen. It's all of our business. Domestic and sexual violence is a community issue. It's not a personal problem. It impacts all of us. So speak up if you see something happening, or make the call. Obviously, do it in a safe way. Nobody put yourselves in danger, but then it's having the courage to look inward. We need to challenge the things that we've been socialized to do at times. Like I said, pushing the little girl down at the playground and oh, he has a crush on you. So like reflecting on those things and how we kind of participate in perpetuating these types of things. And then it's modeling nonviolent behavior. Challenging gender stereotypes, that's why we say that men can be victims too, but because men are supposed to be tough, strong, independent, that they're not, and that's what keeps men from disclosing these things that have happened to them and from getting the help and support that they need, is some of these stereotypes. And then at the end of the day, it's just to respect and promote respect of all people. You don't have to like everybody. You don't have to be friends with everybody, but to give everybody the basic human respect and dignity. We all deserve that. We're all people. So that really brings me to the end of my formal presentation here. I want to leave everybody with no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. So just something to take away from.
Thank you so much, Kate. I do have a few questions, and just to let our listeners know, I'm going to be, doing a blog post that will go along with this video, so you'll be able to read more as well as watch the video. So Kate, have much experience in with our patient advocate business, and we often deal with older adults. Have you had any experience or anything that you can share as far as like aging adults as being victims of sexual or domestic violence?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's also very pervasive, that's happening as we're getting older and we become more vulnerable. I mean, sexual assaults can happen in assisted living facilities. Again, it's about power and control. So if somebody is caring for somebody, or if somebody is responsible for another person and they have that power and control over them, if they want to perpetrate these things against them, they can. So it's something to be mindful of. And then also, um, people don't just stop being sexually active or stop participating in relationships just because they reach a certain age. It's something that's always happening. And so, still talking about that people have the right to, using prophylactics and things like that. It's not just to prevent pregnancy, it's also to prevent STIs and things like that. So, still talking about healthy relationships, asking questions about if people feel safe with their caretakers, how they're doing with all of that. I mean, it definitely is still happening. It happens to anybody that might be vulnerable, is at risk.
Kate, with these older adults and say we're looking at seniors. So if you're an aide or a nurse or a social worker or someone working in that type of a setting, say a nursing home, would there be anything that someone might notice if they maybe have concerns that someone, an aging or a senior had been a victim of sexual violence?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, depending on the level of care and depending on the level of access that people have, I mean, you can explain this to mom of the things to look for, like of, if there's been trauma to certain parts of the body, what that might look like.
Mhm.
That's something like if somebody's helping somebody bathe or, assisting with, um, changing, um, underwear and things like that, if there's any signs like that. It's also if people they're not wanting to work with somebody specifically, or they are having problems with you touching them in certain places. Those are some of the signs of things. If they're withdrawn, um sudden changes in behaviors, those are some things to look for as well. I mean, and something that people can do in the medical field to help people feel more comfortable too is to, like, even though that you have a job to do, you have certain things that you have to do, but that doesn't mean that you still can't, let people know what you're going to be doing, asking them if that's okay. Just knowledge is always power, and knowledge always helps people feel more comfortable. So if they can understand what you're going to be doing before you do it, even though we might be getting in a routine, like this is how we do it every day, like, but I can tell you, like, um asking those questions, explaining those things, people really do appreciate that kind of thing.
Thanks, Kate. So a couple of other questions. So can we prevent sexual assault? Is it reasonable to say that it's preventable?
I think the biggest part of preventing sexual assault is teaching people not to rape, teaching people not to perpetrate and not to rape. Um, because we've been talking about this for forever, right? Of things that people can do to keep, like I just named a couple of them: carry mace, put your keys between your fingers as you're walking to your car, like all of those things. But at the end of the day, um, somebody could overpower me, or somebody could do that, right? So I think the biggest thing is to help people understand that they have ownership over their bodies, teaching people to be respectful of others, and that it's not okay. You don't get to do something just because you want to. Um, Getting comfortable talking about sex, and what that means within relationships, especially to our kiddos. I know that can be very uncomfortable and very awkward. But they need to learn those things before going away to college, before being married. I mean, um, people are often having their first relationships, in middle school. Um, so it's important to be talking about what consent is, what you get to do or you don't get to do in relationships. I think that's what's really important.
Okay, while we're on the subject of the kids, is there anything, age specific that, how young can you start talking about it with maybe not getting into the whole details, but I mean, is there a good touch, bad touch? I mean, what words, what do they use to teach, to begin to teach a child how to say no?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it starts super early with just like everybody knows about manners, right? About asking, saying please, and things like that. But it also goes along with, sharing and people understanding what that means. Like, if somebody wants to come over and play with your kiddo's toy, or they want to play with somebody else's toy, like they don't get it. You don't say share just because that other person wants it. They have to wait until that kid is done with it. And then like having the conversation before taking your kid to daycare. Well, you know that if you take this to daycare, then somebody else is going to want to play with it. Do you want to save this for just for you for at home time, or do you want to maybe have to share that later? Just having those conversations and giving choices, and people understanding that, again, just because you want something, that doesn't mean that you are entitled to it. That doesn't mean that you just get it. And the more that we can be comfortable saying no and talking that over with our kids, that it's just a natural thing. And if somebody says no, that doesn't mean that they don't like you or they don't want to be friends with you or anything anymore. Like, people get to. So it's not only being able to say no ourselves, it's also teaching that it's okay to hear no, and that it's not the end of the world. It's a
Gotcha, thanks.
natural part. Yep.
Um, so the next question is there ways or signs for people to be able to spot or pick out, say, an abuser? I mean, are there certain warning signs that an abuser may have, or characteristics?
Sure. And that's what makes things difficult, is because you can't just necessarily spot one, as they're walking down the street or as they're approaching you. I think that's part of it too, is people are really good at not revealing themselves. They know how to act appropriately in social situations. A lot of times they're, very sociable, have a lot of surface level friendships. So it can be really hard to determine that. So I mean, part of it is going with your gut. Trust your gut. At the end of the day, if something doesn't feel right to you, it's not. um and thinking about things like on a larger picture. So through my experiences and in my education, I remember reading, I went to a training where we talked about sex offenders, and reading a book from that training as well. And so it, an example, like an adult man wanting to come
Yes.
over and just hang out with your kids, and wanting to babysit them, really liking them. you know do they have other relationships? Do they have other adult relationships They're not related, they're not friends with you, they're just really attentive and really focused on your kids specifically, that's something that I might, or that's something that I would think is strange. Because as adults, I mean, yeah, kids are great. Like I love my nieces and nephews, like I'm having one myself. But I don't want to, just spend a lot of my time with somebody else's kid. That's kind of weird. So like looking at those things and like asking the questions why, and why would it need to be, unsupervised? Because that's often how it starts, is it starts to build a rapport so that they can have access to kiddos. And so that's just an example of something, but it's just being really mindful and trusting your gut about things. Oh, and
So
boundaries.
I know we've been talking
Sorry, I was
mostly about sexual assault, but that's okay. But if, what are maybe some warning signs that you may have gotten yourself into an abusive relationship that could at some point in time escalate?
Sure. So when people are just entering into those intimate relationships, I mean, we're all usually on our best behavior, right? When we're first starting to date, first starting to establish that. But one of the things is it's not, you know, red flags to look for is boundary pushing. So wanting to spend all of their time with you, not having any of their own um activities and things that they want to participate in. If they want to do something, you should too. um Not allowing you to be your own person. So I use this example a lot. Like at the beginning of a relationship, if you want to, let's just say that I want to go out with my girlfriends one night. We're having a girls night, we haven't had one in a while, I'm really excited to go do that. And my partner is like, do you really have to go? I had a bad day, can't we just stay home and watch a movie and order a pizza? It would mean a lot to me. And I'm like, okay, this time I will. I understand that you've had a bad day, maybe you need some support, right? So I stay home this time. Then we reschedule our girls weekend for the next weekend. Now my partner tries to guilt me again, to stay home with them. And when I say no this time, because I've already rescheduled it once, then they start to get upset and they start to really pick a fight with me. Maybe they start to say terrible things about my friends. Maybe they start to comment on my appearance or my clothing, and then just really put me in a bad mood, just ruin my night so that I don't go out. Right. And so this starts to happen more often. Maybe the next time they'll take your phone and they'll hide your car keys, or they're going to pick a fight with you every time before you go hang out with any type of friend, before you see family, because that's the goal, is to isolate you. Because in domestic violence relationships, you are not your own person, you are their property. That's how they see you. You are an extension of them. So any of the not respecting your boundaries, nothing is ever their fault, everything is always your fault, even the littlest things. um Jealousy can be a really fine line between unhealthy and abusive. It's all about the intent behind it, right? Are they trying to control you? If they're trying to control you, and trying to have power over you, it's abuse. So it's noticing some of those red flags, but oftentimes we want to, wave them away because we're just getting to know somebody. They have good qualities. Somebody that's abusive is not abusive all the time. So sometimes it can be hard to pay attention to those other red flags.
Thanks, Kate. So last question for you. And I know we went a little bit over, but it's been a great conversation. But so if I know someone, a friend or a family member that's been a victim of sexual assault, what can I do? Is there something I can do to help them? I mean, what can I do to support them?
Yeah, first and foremost, it's believing them. We are not judge and jury here with our people. So if somebody says something to them, it's believing that that was their experience and ask them what you can do for them. Or offer to be with them if they have to go and do something difficult. Sometimes after you've been sexually assaulted, it's hard to be alone, so I can come over and spend the afternoon with you. Things like that. It's really believing them and then letting them make the determinations of what they need, um, not pushing them in one direction or another. Again, we want them to feel like they have control back over their lives, and they're the ones that are going to have to deal with the consequences of their choices. So like reporting to law enforcement, while that can hold people accountable at times, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes people don't get convicted, sometimes people don't spend time in jail, but they have to now participate in a thing that's going to last for over a year most likely, and relive it every single time that there's a court case or that they have to tell somebody about it, and that is a lot. So it's really letting people make their own choices and just being supportive and being with them when they're making the choices.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. And I just want to say, Katie, we really appreciate you coming by and having this conversation. I know Katie's been speaking a lot from her experience in the state of Wisconsin. So in the blog post, I will have some national resources available for you, some hotlines and some other things that you can have that you can use throughout our viewing area. So with that being said, Katie, I'd like to thank you again. And I look forward to being able to look at other discussions that we can have to help our viewers and our listeners as well. So with that being said, hope everybody has a great day. Take care now.